Okay, our next podcast is going to go into cellular respiration. So, in your outline, this is listed as energy releasing pathways. The reactions of cellular respiration are going to release energy. We have talked about what energy is, and we've talked about how chemical reactions occur, and they either release energy or use energy. So we're going to be looking at a few major chemical reactions required for life. And first one is cellular respiration. So this is the process by which fuel molecules can be broken down and then energy released. All right, so we get those fuel molecules from our diet, such as panda bear here eating the bamboo shoots. He's going to get his um, carbohydrate molecules, fuel molecules like glucose from that food, and it will be used and broken down in cellular respiration. So there's a balance here between cellular respiration that occurs in our mainly in our mitochondria in our cells, and photosynthesis that photosynthetic organisms utilize this process where solar energy um, fuels chemical reactions that are going to produce larger organic molecules. And these organic molecules are the glucose and other molecules that are used in cellular respiration. Also, oxygen is released from photosynthesis, and that's used in cellular respiration. Through a series of reactions, cellular respiration releases carbon dioxide and water, and most importantly, this ATP molecule that is used to power our cellular work. We've mentioned that molecule already. So in the ecosystem, this is a balance here that occurs, this flow of energy from photosynthetic organisms to respiring organisms back to photosynthetic organisms. Now, in our outline here, we mentioned that some of these pathways require oxygen, such as cellular respiration, and so that's an aerobic process here where the oxygen is required. There is also some processes that produce ATP without the presence of oxygen, and that is fermentation. Now, it's not as productive, meaning it does not produce as much ATP, but it can occur without the presence of oxygen. Now, cellular respiration is what's called a catabolic reaction. Catabolic reactions are those that split larger molecules into smaller ones, and they release energy. Anabolic reactions are those that take smaller molecules and make larger molecules. That would be like photosynthesis. And that's what we're going to look at in our next chapter. So we'll be looking at both of these major processes, but here we're starting with cellular respiration. Now in the outline, we also mentioned that cellular respiration is a redox reaction. Now redox reaction means that it is going to have some molecules that gain electrons and some molecules that lose electrons. And so that's redox is short for oxidation reduction. Here's a slide here. So redox reaction. Oxidation is when a substance loses electron, and reduction is when a substance gains electrons. So we can see this in this little simple formula here, where sodium and chloride are combined together, and sodium becomes oxidized. Oxidized again means that it loses an electron, and then chlorine becomes reduced, meaning that it gains an electron, and this changes the charge. Again, this is an ion. This forms an ionic bond. But redox reaction are those where you have electrons that are lost and electrons that are gained. And so that's an important part. Electrons playing a very important role in cellular respiration. Let's look at just the overview of cellular respiration here. We start with our fuel molecule here. We have our carbohydrate, and it is oxidized, and we have our oxygen here, and it is reduced. So the oxygen is going to gain electrons in the form of hydrogen, and that's the main hydrogen carriers. Our main electron carriers are hydrogen that carries one electron. And then we have our oxidation is losing electrons. So we've lost these hydrogens here are lost in a series of steps. So that's the oxidation reduction process. All right, before we get into the kind of the steps, this is an overview right here of cellular respiration. Before we get into all the steps of the breakdown of our fuel molecule, we want to mention those electron carriers. Now, electrons are stripped from the fuel molecule and from other things, and they are picked up by energy electron carriers in the cell, and then they carry them to another part of the cell or the organelle. And these electron carriers are very important. The main electron carrier is NAD. So they're broken down, these electrons, in a series of steps, and then the NAD can pick up those electrons, pick up and again the hydrogen is carrying it, but so the NAD, which is short for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. That's the name of the compound there, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, NAD. But when it picks up a hydrogen, it's NADH, and it carries this hydrogen to another part of the mitochondria where it's going to be utilized in a step of cellular respiration. So that's very important to know these electron carriers. All right. So now we want to go into the steps of cell respiration, and there's really four broad steps, three or four. Sometimes one of them is just considered kind of the grooming of a molecule, not considered a step. So you could call it 3 steps or 4 steps. But here's, if we just look at it, the three big steps or stages or phases or whatever you want to call it of cell respiration is glycolysis, the citric acid cycle, this is also referred to as the Krebs cycle, and oxidative phosphorylation. This is also referred to as the electron transport chain or chemiosmosis. All those things occur here in this last step. So these 3 broad steps are what we're going to look at for cell respiration. So the first one is glycolysis. So this starts with our major fuel molecule, which is glucose. So we start with glucose, which again we get in our diet. We get that, and it's a 6-carbon sugar. And so we start with that in glycolysis, and then it is the first thing that happens is that it is broken down into 2 3-carbon molecules, pyruvate or pyruvic acid. So the pyruvate is a 3-carbon molecule. So glucose is basically split in half. During that split, we have hydrogens that leave, and the hydrogens are picked up by that NAD that we talked about. That's going to play a role later. And then also we have a production of some ATP. So we have some phosphorylation. Remember, we talked about phosphorylation being the adding of a free phosphate to the ADPs, and so a little bit of that occurs. Really, we have a production for every 1 molecule of glucose, we have 2 ATPs that are produced. Okay, so that's that's kind of what happens there, and that's the first broad step. The second broad step is the Krebs cycle, or also called the citric acid cycle. Now, there's another something that occurs on the way there. Sometimes it's referred to as a phase, and sometimes it's just referred to as kind of the grooming of a molecule. Sometimes chemists refer to it that way. But what happens is now we have pyruvate. We no longer have glucose. It's gone. We have pyruvate. Pyruvate hooks up with an enzyme, and when it attaches to this enzyme, the acetyl coenzyme, it forms a different molecule, forms coenzyme A. And so when this occurs, it kind of changes the molecule. And so then it goes into the Krebs cycle, or also referred to as the citric acid cycle. So there's a lot of things that happen right here. We have some more hydrogens that are split off, and they're picked up by NAD and another electron carrier, FAD. We have a couple of ATPs that are produced, but all of that occurs in the mitochondria. All right, so this is the mitochondria here. Glycolysis takes place outside the mitochondria. The citric acid cycle is inside the mitochondria. And then our third and last step of cell respiration is oxidative phosphorylation, but are also the electron transport. So all the electrons that are picked up from here and from here, they come over here and form a gradient, and that gradient produces a lot of phosphorylation on the membrane of the mitochondria. And so this produces a lot of ATP. Most of our ATPs are produced here in the Krebs cycle. And we can look at that to kind of see some numbers of how much is produced right here. So we have about 2 from glycolysis, about 2 from the Krebs cycle, and about 32 or 34 comes from the electron transport. And so that's where most of our energy molecules come from. Okay, so glycolysis actually does not require oxygen. Most oxygen is required over here, so it can proceed without the presence of oxygen, and so that occurs and can make a little bit of ATP, just glycolysis by itself. And so this can happen and couple with fermentation and produce some energy. There's organisms like bacteria and fungi, and some of our cells, some of our muscle cells can actually carry this out and produce a little bit of energy without oxygen. And that's called fermentation. In our cells, muscle cells, it's called lactic acid fermentation. Okay, so that is where we're going to end for cellular respiration. That introduces the process of cellular respiration and stages and steps of that process. And so our next topic that we're going to go into is going to be photosynthesis. And so that's the other major reaction that takes place in the ecosystem. And this will require solar energy and smaller molecules, and then make our fuel molecules like glucose. All right.